I wasn't dead, but my farm was already for sale. The listing found me, not the other way around. I was searching weather for the week. Rain promised, maybe, like it always does in June. When a banner popped up with a photo I knew better than my own face. White farmhouse with a sag in the porch I've been meaning to fix. Red barn leaning like a tired old man. Windbreak of poplars I planted the spring my son left for Denver. Exceptional investment potential, the caption said. Beneath it, my acreage, my creek, my sky. And the name of the agent I'd seen once at the feed store, the kind who calls pastures outdoor amenities. I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and poured coffee with steady hands. A year earlier, my nephew Eli had promised to keep this place breathing. He was 24, all bone and grin, palms still soft from city work but eyes that lit up when I talked irrigation. My boy had made it clear he wasn't coming back, and the roof doesn't nail itself. So I did what stubborn men do when they're tired of fighting time alone. I drafted a will that gave Eli the farm someday with conditions so simple you could carve them on a fence post. Work the land, keep the water, don't sell the bones of our name. The listing said, motivated seller. I walked the fence line before calling anyone. The land tells the truth better than people do. The heifers were lazy in the shade. The gate on the south pasture hung right. The ditch was whispering the same steady song. The place looked fine, the way a man looks fine the day before he tells his wife he's leaving. I called Eli last. You list my farm? I asked like I was asking about the weather. There was a pause long enough to grow a weed. He cleared his throat. Uncle, it's just an appraisal. You always said we need to know what things are worth. I know what it's worth, I said. It's worth a life. He laughed too light. No one's doing anything without you. I told him I needed feed from town and hung up. Then I drove past the realty office and parked where my truck couldn't be seen from inside. Through the window I watched Eli shake hands with the agent. He wore a shirt with buttons, and the agent's smile didn't reach his eyes. I could have marched in. I could have made a scene big enough to trend in a town that doesn't use the internet. Instead, I wrote 3 names on a gum wrapper. My lawyer, the water commissioner, and the only neighbor who's never lied to me. There's a way you kill a sale without lifting a finger. You starve it of what makes dirt valuable. And around here, that isn't the barn. It's the water, the title, and the story. I started with the story. People still listen if you speak quietly enough. By evening, the feed store knew I wasn't dead yet. By morning, the coffee shop did too. By noon, the agent had heard a different word drifting through town. A word buyers hate more than drought. Contested. I let that word do what it does best. It bought me a week. I'd need them all. Because Eli had already made his first mistake. He thought the farm was mine to give. He'd forgotten it was the land's to keep. And the land keeps count. Always. I didn't confront Eli again. That was for him to want and he didn't. Men rarely run toward a truth they know will burn. Instead, I drove to a brick office that still smelled faintly of carbon paper and shut the door behind me. Marlene, who'd filed deeds here longer than Eli's been breathing, looked over her glasses. You look like a man fixing a fence before the storm, she said. Storm's already here, I said. I need 3 things. A conservation easement draft, a life estate recorded by end of week, and a right of first refusal in favor of my neighbor Tom Brewer. Her pencil hovered. You planning to die? Planning not to, I said. But planning, anyway. We started with the easement. City folks think it's a ribbon you tie around a meadow for photographs. Out here it's a set of teeth. The draft said no subdivision, no conversion to recreational pasture, no sale without carrying the covenant like a scar. The stream corridor got a buffer wider than Eli's attention span. The water rights, adjudicated when my grandfather rode a mule to court, were bound to on-site use for agricultural purpose only. No pipes to a golf course. No temporary transfer to a hedge fund's soybean fantasy. Marlene read every line as if she was tracing the veins on our county's hand. Then the life estate. Clean, simple. I can live here and run cattle until the gods get bored of me. Anyone who wants the dirt has to wait until I stop breathing. Anyone who tries to move me has to answer to a sheriff who still hunts with me on Thursdays. Last, Tom's right of first refusal. Tom is the kind of poor that owns his tools and owes no one. He also owns the only high meadow that could make my south pasture sing in a wet year. I'd promised his father once we'd keep the fence friendly. This clause said if anyone ever tried to buy me out, Tom had the first ticket. Buyers hate neighbors with rights. It's like selling a car with an ex-wife in the passenger seat. By lunch, I had signatures queued. By supper, we had appointments. I called the water commissioner next. Think of this as maintenance, I said. On paper. On the spine, I said. He grunted approval. Bureaucrats who also fix tractors understand the poetry of a good form. I slept like a man who'd sharpened a blade. 2 days later, Eli brought the agent to walk the property with a photographer. I was mending a gate when they rounded the poplars. The camera lens winked. The agent beamed. Eli wore a smile, trying to be brave. "Afternoon," I said. "Mr. Harrow," the agent said cheerfully. "We're capturing the natural charm." "Charm doesn't carry water," I said. "Papers do." He blinked. Eli swallowed. "You'll find the title cloud passing in by tonight," I said mildly. "And a current use covenant rolling in tomorrow. Pack a jacket." The agent glanced at Eli. "We have buyers scheduled." "Then you should bring boots," I said, and returned to the gate. That evening, Marlene faxed the stamped life estate to the agent before he could print a flyer. The conservation easement filing notice hit his inbox with the soft chime that ends a city man's appetite. Tom dropped by with 2 beers and a copy of his new right. He didn't smile. He just tipped the bottle, respect paid in barley. Eli didn't come home. I set a plate anyway and ate both servings. The gate held through the night. So would the paperwork. Sometimes you build a fence the world can see. Sometimes you build one it can't. It holds just the same. On Saturday, the open house became a picnic for 3. Eli, the agent, and the photographer marooned in a meadow without permission to call it pretty. Cars slowed on County 12 and kept going when they saw me on the porch with a ledger. The agent walked up the steps with a smile like a dull knife. "There seems to be confusion," he said. "No confusion," I said, tapping the ledger. "Just math." He glanced at the book. It wasn't numbers. It was names, hire dates, hours, seasons written in my careful print. Hands that had lifted hay, fixed fence, watched calves. People who earned a say in how this place keeps breathing. I pointed with my pencil. "When buyers ask what comes with the land, tell them it's not only fences and roofs. It's obligations." He tried to laugh. "Obligations don't record." "Not at your office," I said. "They record here." I tapped my chest. "And there." I nodded to the road. He left with a brochure no one wanted. Eli stayed at the gate a long time after, staring at the poplars like they changed language while he was gone. When he finally came up, he kept his voice light. "Uncle, you're making this harder than it needs to be." "You already did that," I said. "I'm making it honest." He ran a hand through his hair. "You said this place would be mine. You wrote it down." "I did," I said. "With conditions. You remember them?" He looked past me. "You're not being reasonable. That's not a condition." That night, I drove to the co-op meeting in the church basement. Folding chairs, coffee you can sand wood with, 6 folks who've kept this valley upright while the world chased a screen. I laid out what I meant to do if Eli didn't remember his promise. Reorganize the pasture lease into a cooperative, set the barn under a 501(c)(3) that trains kids who don't have a place to stand, grant equipment used to members who show up when wind takes shingles. Mrs. Alvarez, who can fix a baler blindfolded, nodded once. "About time," she said. "Land shouldn't be loners." On my way home, I stopped by Tom's. We shook hands without talking. That's the thing about old men and old land. We communicate in decisions. Back at the house, a white envelope sat under the stone by my door. Inside, a letter of intent to purchase, full of numbers that would make a banker drool and a cattleman laugh. At the bottom, the agent had scribbled, "We can work around the filings. City men always think paper is a door you can kick in if your shoes shine bright enough." I wrote 2 words on the LOI and slid it back under the stone for Eli to find. Find water, because here money talks until the ditch goes dry. Then the land speaks, and it speaks oldest. I turned off the porch light and let the night carry the message. Coyotes answered, eloquent as ever. Eli didn't. Not yet. Monday morning, the water commissioner's truck rumbled into the yard like judgment with mud on its tires. Tom climbed out of his pickup behind him. They nodded, looked at the ditch and nodded again. I'll need to verify the diversion records, the commissioner said. Got them, I answered, handing him a folder I'd prepared in '98 and updated every spring. Paper, yes. Also photographs of gates open and shut. Dates inked on Polaroids with my wife's careful script. The last year she felt up to walking the line with me. The commissioner thumbed through, satisfied. These rights are in perfect standing. He turned to Eli, who'd shuffled out with sleep still stuck to his face. You're the interested party? Eli's eyes slid to me and back. We're just evaluating options. Options without water are postcards, the commissioner said. Pretty and worthless. When they left, Eli followed me into the barn. Why are you doing this? He asked, finally dropping the smile. Why make it impossible? I set a grease gun on the bench. Impossible is what you did when you tried to sell a man's home while he was still brewing coffee. He flinched. Good. Pain means the nerve isn't dead. I didn't mean. You meant exactly what you signed, I said softly. Motivated seller. That's me, is it? He didn't answer. Guilt tried to climb into his voice and fell off. I wiped my hands. You have a week, I said. 7 days to decide if you want to keep this place with your hands or leave it with your mouth. What does that mean? It means you show up at dawn, you mend fence, you learn the ditch, and you apology by action. Or you pack. He scoffed, but not convincingly. This isn't the Stone Age, uncle. No, I said. It's a Tuesday. He didn't show at dawn. He showed at 10, after his phone was done telling him what mattered. I had him clean the hayloft. He lasted 40 minutes before taking a call. By noon he was gone. That evening I signed the documents converting the barn into the nonprofit. I made Mrs. Alvarez chair. I set stipends for apprentices out of a fund I hadn't touched since my boy left. Money meant for a future I'd once thought would have my last name on it. Turns out futures don't need names, just chances. Eli texted at 2 a.m. This is unfair. You're punishing me because Dad left. I stared at the screen and thought about the day my son drove away without looking in the mirror. Then I typed, I'm punishing you for acting like he did. Delete punishing. Replace with, I'm correcting my mistake. Send. Sleep came easy for once. The coyotes kept their counsel. So did I. By Thursday, the agent had shifted tactics from charm to pressure. He called 3 times before lunch, left voicemails about fiduciary duty and market windows. I let them stack up like cordwood and called my lawyer instead. Martin is not a man to waste adjectives. Is there a sale agreement? He asked. No. Then there is no duty. He paused. Are you ready to stop being polite? Born ready, I said and heard him smile. We filed a cease and desist on use of my name and address in marketing materials. We notified the agent's broker that any further representations implying my consent would be considered fraud and reported to the state. Then Martin drafted my favorite document. A letter revoking any informal permissions Eli might claim and warning that further interference with operations would constitute tortious interference. Fancy phrase, simple idea. Touch my work, and you'll pay for the bruise. At supper I set 2 plates again. Eli didn't come. The silence tasted like the first bite of snow. I walked out to the poplars and stood where my wife used to stand when calves came at night. The air carried the smell of cut alfalfa from Brewer's Place. My hands remembered the weight of winter. I found Eli sitting on the porch when I came back. Eyes red in a way beer doesn't explain. Bella left, he said, like it was a weather report. Said she doesn't do waiting rooms. I sat without speaking. The boards creaked the way old men do when they think too long. He tried again. I was just trying to make sure we were stable. You're 24 and you tried to sell a century because patience pinched, I said. Stability doesn't come from cash. Comes from roots. He scoffed. Roots don't pay bills. They paid mine, I said. And yours for a year. You remember who bought those tires? Who covered your tuition until you changed majors to figuring it out? He looked at the yard. Shame tried to find a chair and sat on the step instead. I let the quiet stretch. People think words are what do the teaching. They forget silence has a sharper edge. Jobs at the co-op Saturday, I said finally. You can come or you can keep pretending the internet is work. He didn't answer. That was answer enough. In the morning, I signed the last papers that made the Barnes conversion irrevocable without a unanimous board vote. Mrs. Alvarez brought coffee and a pen that writes like a plow. No flourish, just furrow. You're certain? She asked. I'm done pretending love means leaving the door unlocked, I said. She nodded. Then close it. I did. The click was small and complete. That afternoon, a black SUV rolled in and idled too long by the porch. A man in a sport coat stepped out, introduced himself as an investor who'd heard there was an opportunity. I pointed to the ditch. There, I said. He followed my finger and saw water he couldn't buy. He left with his leather folder flatter than when he arrived. I slept that night without checking the locks. They were finally working. Eli tried one last angle. Sympathy dressed as duty. He showed up at dawn for the first time in months, hands in the pockets of a jacket that had never seen a nail. Let me help, he said soft. Start me on something easy. I handed him a pair of fencing pliers and pointed to the north line where winter had chewed through 3 posts. He nodded, relieved, and walked out like a man expecting the land to go easy on him because he showed up before breakfast. The land doesn't care. It watched him the way it watches all of us. Without mercy, without malice, just memory. By 10 he'd blistered both palms and learned that wire's language is patience spoken at the pace of blood. He came back, laid the pliers on the bench, and tried a different kind of work, the kind done with a tongue. Uncle, he said, what if we lease instead of sell? Short term. You keep the house. I handle the rest. He said handle like a man who thinks he can carry an anvil because he's seen a photograph of one. I already leased, I said, and handed him a copy of the cooperative agreement. He scanned the names and went pale at Mrs. Alvarez's. You gave it to them? I gave it to us, I said. The us that kept you fed when you were small. He dropped the paper like it stung. You set me up. No, I said. I set you down, where you chose to stand. He stormed off and didn't come back for lunch. I mended tack and thought about the mathematics of regret. It's never just subtraction. It's compound interest on a debt you didn't know you were accruing while you were busy being clever. Late afternoon, Tom drove up with hay he didn't need to bring. He handed me a folded newspaper. The listing had been pulled. In its place, a small notice. Property encumbered by easements and life estate. Inquiries suspended. Tom grunted approval. You done? He asked. Almost, I said. One more thing. That evening I opened the steel box under my bed and pulled out the envelope I'd written the day I signed the first will. It was addressed to Eli in my wife's unused stationery, because I'd always imagined she'd be the one to say these words kindly. I can only say them clean. You tried to sell what made you. You forgot the difference between a thing and a place. This place is a promise. You broke it. I sealed the envelope and slid it into the safe behind the ledger. If I died tomorrow, he'd still inherit something, the truth. Maybe the only thing worth inheriting when you've proven you can't hold anything else. The coyotes sang at moonrise. I answered by sleeping. You can't sing with a mouth full of bitterness. I was emptying mine. The first rain in weeks came on Sunday. It did what rain always does. Made fools of forecasts and saints of men who had the sense to cover tools. Eli stood on the porch, watching the downpour like it owed him an apology. All this, he said, sweeping his hand at the fields. For what? So we can scrape by? You could be comfortable. I am, I said, pulling on boots that have known more water than most men know days. He shook his head. This is stubbornness. This is a life, I said, stepping past him into the wet. Stubbornness is what you called commitment the day it stopped paying you compliments. In the barn, the roof drummed a hymn I never learned the words to but can hum in my bones. Mrs. Alvarez showed up with 2 kids in jackets too thin for the storm and put them to work rolling hoses. They were clumsy and earnest and faster by the 3rd coil. Eli hovered, always at the edge of help, never stepping in far enough to get forgiven by sweat. After chores, the co-op met again, this time standing under the eaves with steam rising from our shoulders. We signed bylaws that smell like coffee and rain. 8-member board, open books, apprentices paid in cash and breakfast, decisions made by those who show up. Eli didn't sign. He lingered like a man deciding whether to stay at a party he hadn't been invited to. At dusk, the storm broke open into a sunset so sincere it embarrassed the sky. We stood quiet, as if gratitude requires the courtesy of silence. Eli cleared his throat. What if I came mornings, he said. Helped, learned. Could it change? Yes, I said, because hope is a tool too. But not the papers. He winced. So I work, and I get nothing. You get the skill to keep yourself when paper fails you, I said. It's worth more than anything you tried to sell. He didn't answer, but he showed up the next morning at 6 and didn't leave until his back told him the time. He came Tuesday and Wednesday too. He stopped looking like a listing and started looking like a person again. On Thursday, the agent called Eli, not me. I heard the conversation through the open kitchen window. We can revisit in a quarter, the agent said. If the elder passes, if the filings can be unwound. I watched Eli's face through the glass. Something in him hardened or softened, I couldn't tell which. We're done, he said, and hung up. He didn't look at me. I didn't say anything. Some choices need to be made without an audience. That night, I pulled the envelope back out of the safe. I didn't open it. I just held it until the paper warmed to my hand, then put it away. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Something quieter. A slackening of the rope. The knot still held. Harvest came lean and decent the way honest years do. We cut and baled and stacked without drama or loss, and I slept the sleep of calves untroubled by coyotes. Eli worked mornings, sometimes afternoons, and left his phone in his truck more often than not. He stopped bringing city friends around to see the rustic. He started staying after chores to fix what he'd once photographed. 2 weeks after the last bale, he asked to walk the ditch with me. We moved slow, talking like men with water between them. Pauses long enough for a heron to believe in you. I was scared, he said eventually, that I'd end up like Dad, that this place would show me I was small. Everyone is small here, I said. It's the only way to fit in the sky. He smiled without showing teeth. I don't want to sell anymore. I know, I said. He kicked a clod of mud into the current like a boy. Will you change the papers? No, I said. He nodded, as if relief and regret had agreed on a truce. Back at the house, we found a letter from the broker threatening damages due to interference. Martin read it, made a sound like a man discovering a loose lug nut, and wrote them back 3 sentences and 1 citation that ended the conversation in a way only the law can. I framed the broker's letter in the outhouse. It improved the view. The co-op took in 2 more kids. Tom swapped me pasture days when the creek sulked. Mrs. Alvarez nagged me into scheduling a checkup I'd avoided for a decade. The doctor used words that sound scarier on paper than they feel in a good morning. I cut back salt and swore to walk more. The land liked the bargain. That night Eli handed me a folded sheet, his own ledger of sorts. Hours worked, tasks done, mistakes and fixes. At the bottom he'd written, I didn't earn what you offered. I'm asking to earn something else. Place. I didn't answer. I put his paper on the mantel where my wife's rosary hangs and let it sit until it felt less like a plea and more like a plan. Then the phone rang at a time people with sense are asleep. It was the agent again, this time angrier, with words like tortious and bad faith, spilling out his mouth like nails. I listened, said nothing, and then did the only kindness I owed him. I gave him Marlene's number. He called her the next morning. By afternoon, he had learned the single immutable law of our county. Marlene does not lose. He pulled the listing fully and forever. Eli brought home fried chicken he'd paid for himself. We ate on the porch without talking business. The poplars whispered the gossip of leaves. It sounded like an old house exhaling. I breathed with it. Autumn asked its old questions with new leaves. We answered by stacking wood. Eli swung a maul like a man finding his rhythm and grinned when he missed. Splitting is a prayer you say with your shoulders. It forgives you for saying it poorly if you keep saying it. On a Wednesday, we held the first class in the new barn school. 4 teenagers showed up, 2 from families that had never owned land and 2 from families that had forgotten how to speak to it. Mrs. Alvarez taught knots. Tom taught how to read a cloud. I taught the math of ditch gates, which is also the math of patience. Open a little, wait, look, adjust, repeat. Eli taught nothing and everything by fetching, holding, listening. After, a girl with hair the color of fresh rust asked me why we don't sell to make life easier. I told her the truth. Easy isn't the same as good, and money is a kind of weather that never waters what you need it to. She wrote it down with a seriousness that humbled the room. That evening Eli brought me a contract I hadn't asked for. A lease for a small backfield in his name, 10 years, $1 a year, with clauses he'd copied from the co-op bylaws. Show up, share, repair. He'd had Mrs. Alvarez look it over. I want to be on the hook, he said. Hooks make anchors. We signed. His signature was careful, as if the ink might judge him. I slept badly for the first time in weeks. Not from worry, from the ache that comes when a scar begins to stretch over something living. 2 days later, a letter arrived from my son in Denver, the first in years that wasn't a holiday card with a new return address. He'd seen the listing online back when it existed and wanted to check in. The phrasing balanced apology and distance on the thin line cowards walk. I set it aside and fixed a hinge that didn't squeak but might someday. Eli found the letter and didn't read it. That counted. At the next co-op meeting, we voted to name the apprentice fund after my wife. Someone suggested we carve her name into the barn beam. I said she'd prefer we kept the beam intact. Names belong on paper, not on structures that must carry weight. When the meeting ended, Eli lingered. If I had waited, he said quietly, would it have been different? Yes, I said. But then you wouldn't have learned patience the way you did. He nodded. The hard way. It's the only way worth remembering. On the way out, he stopped at the fence and ran his hand along a new post he'd set himself. It's straight, he said, almost to the wood. It is, I said. We stood for a long time without improving the moment with talk. The coyotes sang later, but softer. Maybe they were tired. Maybe I was. Either way, we'd earned the quiet. Winter came with its usual honesty. The creek put on a thin shirt of ice and then a coat. The barn school turned into a stove and a circle of boots. We taught maintenance and mercy, same lesson, different nouns. Eli missed 2 mornings and told me before I noticed. I pretended I would have noticed. He pretended he believed me. That's family. On a Monday, Marlene called to say the last of the filings had been recorded and the file now reads like a cathedral. Layered, stubborn, built for weather. I locked it tight, she said. Only way it opens is with the right hands. Thank you, I said. She harumphed something that means you're welcome in clerk, and we hung up. I took the envelope from the safe, the one I'd written in my wife's stationery, and walked it to the poplars. The air smelled like iron and smoke. I opened it and read the words I'd sharpened months ago. They were still true. They were no longer needed. I burned the letter, not as forgiveness, but as fuel. The flame was small and sufficient. That evening, Eli came in with snow on his shoulders and no words in his mouth. We ate stew. He set down his spoon after 2 bites and said, I don't want the farm in your will. I waited. I want the work now. And when you're gone, whenever that is, I want the obligation, not the option. I looked at him the way a field looks at seed. Then stop asking for paper, I said. Keep asking for chores. He nodded, almost smiled. Tomorrow, he said. Before light, I said. We were up before the world remembered itself. The sky was the same tight blue it's been since my grandfather first put a shovel into this ground. We walked the ditch in boots that made the same sound boots have always made here. I showed him the place the ice breaks first. He showed me the place he'd tripped last week and nobody saw. We set a gate, and the water obeyed because it always does when you ask in the right language. On the ridge, a truck slowed. The agent, maybe, or some buyer who'd heard a rumor and wanted to take a photo of a life he'll never learn. He drove on. Eli stood with his hands in his pockets, not from cold, from practice. "You ever get tired of defending it?" he asked. "No," I said. "I get tired of explaining it." We turned toward the barn. The apprentices were already clattering the buckets. Mrs. Alvarez had coffee that could bless a dead man. Tom would be along with jokes that deserved worse than the laughs they'd get. I touched the porch post my wife used to lean against and felt the groove her thumb had made. Fit mine as always. I wasn't dead. The farm wasn't for sale. The water ran. And the land, stubborn, generous, invincible to hurry, kept its promise the way it always does when you do. The story never needed a hero, just someone willing to be heavy where the wind is strong.